Picture this for a moment. You inherit a breathtaking stretch of land that has belonged to your family for generations. It's more than property. It's a piece of your bloodline, a place filled with memories, history, and pride. Now imagine discovering that someone wants to take it away from you, as if your ownership means nothing. This is the story of how a determined landowner, armed with old deeds and a forgotten century-old dam, brought a power-hungry homeowners association to its knees. It all started with a man named Mr. Davidson, a quiet and hard-working individual who inherited a vast tract of land tucked deep inside a peaceful scenic valley. But this wasn't ordinary land. His property stretched across rolling hills, thick forests, and a massive artificial lake, held in place by a dam his great-grandfather had personally built decades earlier with sweat and determination. For years, Mr. Davidson lived a calm and simple life there, enjoying the silence, the beauty, and the connection to his family's legacy. Then everything changed when a wealthy new housing development was built on neighboring land, bringing with it a notoriously ruthless homeowners association, an HOA known throughout the area for bullying anyone who got in its way. Running that HOA was a woman everyone referred to as Karen. She was infamous for her entitled attitude and controlling behavior, acting as though the entire valley existed for her benefit alone. The moment she saw Mr. Davidson's untouched property, she immediately began imagining profits. In her mind, the land would become an exclusive lakeside retreat, a private getaway for the rich residents living in her upscale community. The inconvenient detail that the property already belonged to someone else barely mattered to her. Karen genuinely believed that enough money, influence, and pressure could buy her anything she wanted. At first, she tried to purchase the property by sending Mr. Davidson absurdly low offers that insulted the true value of the land. Each time, he calmly but firmly rejected her proposals. To him, this wasn't just real estate. It was his family's history and heritage. But every refusal only made Karen more determined to take what she wanted. Soon she launched a non-stop campaign of harassment against him. She filed endless complaints about his property upkeep, challenged his boundary lines, and even pushed county officials to declare his historic dam unsafe in hopes of forcing him off the land. Fortunately, Mr. Davidson and his attorney fought back against every false accusation. They produced airtight property deeds and professional engineering inspections, proving the dam was structurally sound and legally protected. After repeated failures in court and with local officials, Karen grew furious. That's when she decided to stop pretending to play fair. In her mind, Mr. Davidson was just one quiet man standing alone, while she had an army of wealthy HOA members backing her. She convinced herself she could simply overpower him. And then she crossed a line nobody expected. Using the excuse of community development, Karen secretly hired construction crews and began illegally building directly on Mr. Davidson's land. And she didn't start with something small or temporary. She ordered the construction of 100 luxury lakeside cabins positioned along the shoreline of his private lake. When Mr. Davidson first discovered the construction crews tearing into his land, he was stunned. He immediately sent cease and desist letters through his lawyer. He contacted the sheriff's department. He rushed to file injunctions in court. But Karen had prepared for this. She used political connections, expensive attorneys, and every legal loophole she could find to delay the process and keep the courts tied up in endless paperwork. While the legal battle dragged on, construction moved forward at full speed. Karen was gambling that once the cabins were fully built, no judge would want to deal with the nightmare of demolishing an entire luxury development. She believed she could eventually pressure Mr. Davidson into accepting a settlement far below the actual value of the land, effectively stealing it from him piece by piece. Month after month, Mr. Davidson stood helplessly watching his once peaceful lakeside property turn into a massive construction zone. The sounds of wildlife and rustling trees were drowned out by saws, hammers, and heavy machinery. Large sections of untouched forest were bulldozed flat to make room for rows of identical luxury cabins. He felt trapped inside a legal system that seemed designed to favor wealthy people bold enough to ignore the rules. To make matters even worse, Karen and several HOA members would casually hold picnics right there on his property, laughing together while discussing plans for the resort they were building illegally. They acted as though Mr. Davidson no longer existed, forcing him to watch from his hilltop home as strangers claimed ownership over his family's land. Eventually, the construction was finished. The cabin stood polished, fully furnished, and ready to welcome their first guests. Karen celebrated like she had already conquered everything. To mark the completion of the resort, she organized an extravagant grand opening party and invited every important HOA member to join the celebration. Music echoed across the valley as guests raised glasses of champagne on the freshly built decks overlooking the calm, sparkling waters of Mr. Davidson's lake. They laughed, toasted to their success, and congratulated each other for what they believed was a complete victory. In their minds, the battle was over. They thought they had beaten him. But they had made one enormous mistake. They underestimated Mr. Davidson. More importantly, they forgot a critical fact about the property they had tried to steal. Mr. Davidson didn't just own the land surrounding the lake. He owned the dam controlling the entire body of water. And ownership of that dam came with power they never considered. While the grand opening party was still in full swing, with music and laughter drifting through the valley, Mr. Davidson quietly stepped out his house and walked toward the old dam's control station. He was not an angry or confrontational man by nature, but months of harassment, humiliation, and greed had pushed him beyond his limit. Karen and the HOA had disrespected his family, destroyed part of his heritage, and treated him like a stranger on land his ancestors had protected for generations. He had tried every legal and peaceful option available to him, but they had chosen manipulation, arrogance, and deception instead. Now he was prepared to take back what belonged to him. With a heavy heart but unwavering determination, Mr. Davidson began operating the old machinery inside the dam. He gripped the massive iron wheels his great-grandfather had installed more than a century earlier and slowly turned them. Deep inside the structure, ancient gears groaned to life. Metal mechanisms that had remained untouched for decades began moving once again. Gradually, the spillway gates started to open. At first, only a thin stream of water escaped through the channels. Then the flow strengthened into a rushing current. Within moments, enormous amounts of lake water began surging downstream, and that powerful flood was heading directly toward the 100 luxury cabins built illegally along the shoreline. Back at the party, the first warning sign was a strange rumbling sound that rolled through the ground beneath the guests' feet. Conversation stopped as people glanced around in confusion, trying to understand what they were hearing. Then panic exploded when someone screamed. Water was rising rapidly around the cabins. What had been a peaceful lake moments earlier was now swelling into a fast-moving flood. The water rushed around the foundations of the buildings and climbed the brand-new wooden staircases. Guests abandoned drinks, food, and decorations as they ran desperately toward their vehicles. Expensive champagne glasses shattered across the decks, while terrified residents scrambled to escape. Karen stood frozen in shock, staring at the chaos unfolding before her eyes. Her expression transformed from smug confidence into complete horror as the calm, scenic lake she had admired moments earlier became a destructive, unstoppable force. But Mr. Davidson understood the land better than anyone alive. He knew exactly how the water would move once the spillway gates were opened. Guided naturally by the terrain of the valley, the floodwaters poured directly through the development. They smashed into cabin doors and surged through windows, destroying expensive furniture, frying electrical systems, and warping pristine hardwood floors. In less than an hour, the luxurious resort Karen had bragged about was reduced to a soaked disaster zone. All 100 cabins sat partially submerged beneath murky floodwater, standing as a perfect monument to greed, arrogance, and stolen ambition. From his position on the hill overlooking the valley, Mr. Davidson watched the destruction unfold in silence. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. What he felt was not happiness, but a grim sense of justice. He had defended his property and honored the legacy left behind by his family. The legal system may have moved slowly, but nature had delivered its judgment swiftly and without mercy. What followed afterward became an absolute legal nightmare for Karen and the HOA. Except this time, every piece of evidence favored Mr. Davidson. The illegal construction project could no longer be denied, and now the entire resort had been destroyed on top of it. Karen and the HOA were suddenly crushed beneath lawsuits, financial losses, and enormous debts tied to their failed flooded development. They lost millions invested into the project and watched their grand vision collapse almost overnight. Before long, the story spread throughout the region and became something of a local legend. A warning about what can happen when powerful people underestimate a quiet man protecting the home his family built generations earlier. Eventually, Mr. Davidson closed the dam gates once again, allowing the water levels to settle back to normal. As the floodwaters slowly receded, they revealed a muddy wasteland filled with wreckage and debris where the luxury cabins had once stood. Over time, the remains of the failed resort were cleared away, and nature slowly reclaimed the damaged shoreline. The birds returned to the valley. Fresh greenery began growing again, and peace finally settled back over the land. Mr. Davidson was left alone at last, still standing as the rightful and undisputed protector of his ancestral property. In the end, his actions sent a message nobody in the valley would ever forget. You cannot steal what belongs to someone else, especially when the rightful owner controls the floodgates. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story of unforgettable revenge and justice, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. And tell us in the comments what you would have done in Mr. Davidson's position.